I read it a while ago, years ago, Ann Landers. And in Ann Landers, she had a comment that went like this: 1 in 4 people is not normal. 1 in 4. I want you to take a moment, think about your 3 closest friends. If they're normal, you're the one. I am the chairman of the Constitution Party of Pennsylvania. Many things I'm known for. I am retired from the Army. That will probably come back up in it later in the brief. Principal of a Christian school. Family really is the center of my life outside of God. And my wife and I, we have 7 children, 10 grandchildren. I'm waiting for number 11 today. That came up already this morning. We have taken on foster children. Several times we've gotten phone calls from the county. My wife and I never signed up, never been interviewed, never did any of that. And several times, though, we've gotten phone calls from the county saying, we have a crisis. We know police are going to do a raid this afternoon at 1 o'clock. And the outcome will be children need a home. Will you take them? And my wife and I have never turned them down. But through that I've learned that system. And it's amazing. I have a daughter that's in graduate school to do social work because of that. But that's its own story in itself. One other thing about my family today, my wife and I have been married for 12,021 days. No, 12,012 days. Got it backwards. 12,012. And if you want to figure it out, it's 32 years, 10 months, and 20 days today. So my wife is very much the center of my life. And then I just have a note. Recently, I was elected official. I was voted out last November, and that's its own story another day. Today, I have the introduction. That's it. I have my challenge, and then end with a story. That is my family. And, of course, I was taken in 2007. The significance of that picture is before I went to Iraq, I spent 708 days in Iraq, was wounded on day 708, and then another 7 months at Walter Reed. And that's another story. But that's my family. One of my most prized possessions is that family, because that picture, because it was a day before I left for Iraq. Some recent challenges. My wife and I, as I already said, 10 grandchildren. We had a grandson born last June 21st with HPE. Basically, he had a stroke before he was born, about the 4-month mark, and at that point, his brain ceased development. He has no brain. He has cerebral spinal fluid in his brain cavity, and he does have a completely intact brain stem that keeps him alive. We were told he'd live for less than 2 minutes. He's been with us 10 months today. We praise God for every minute. He's been a blessing in our life. But it's brought some challenges, because when he goes in the hospital, he goes to either Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is a 5-hour drive away, or to Geisinger, which is about 2 hours away in Danville, Pennsylvania. I'm 5 hours from Philadelphia, 5 hours from Pittsburgh, way up north. And my wife and I, for 7 weeks, every single Saturday, because we had the other 2 grandchildren in that family, we wanted them to see their mother. And for 7 Saturdays, we drove to Philadelphia, 5 hours on the road, spend 3 hours in the hospital, and come back home. And it just was a real challenge to cope with that this spring. We had another granddaughter born last August, and shortly after she was born, it was determined she needed a heart. And I'll never forget it. On the morning of August the 3rd, born August the 9th, but on October 31st, we got the phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. My son and daughter-in-law and their other 2 children live in Bentonville, Arkansas. And he calls, and Mom answers the phone, and she says, yes. And when you get those middle-night phone calls, you're automatically concerned. And he says, we got a heart. She's getting a heart transplant today. My wife and I were in bed there, and we rolled over. We prayed. Because my granddaughter's life was paid for by the cost of another child that died. And there's more to the story, but to make a long story short, we are grateful for that. Again, I'm going to talk about grandchildren later in this. And when either of them have any problems, they go into the hospital, and they spend their share of time in the hospital. Recently, my commitment to the party was really challenged. And I am a friend of Republican Representative Matt Baker, a good friend. And in the middle of January, he called me. He's scheduled to come and speak at my school the week of Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day this year, I think, came on February the 14th. It does every year. But on Wednesday, he was going to speak on Friday. And that week at our school is always called Spirit Week. And the Friday of that week, we always have an assembly in which the speaker talks about love to our students. And he was coming to speak. And he called me in the middle of January and said, Bob, I can't come. I said, oh, okay, well, thanks for letting me know. We'll get a new speaker and so on. He said, but Bob, he said, this is really secret at this point in time. It's no longer secret. He says, I'm going to be appointed Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. Hence, I'm resigning my position as representative. And I'm calling to ask you to take my position. Really got me to thinking. Less than a week later, I got a phone call from the county Republican leadership, and they asked me to come in and meet with them and talk to them. They brought up the Republican caucus leader from Harrisburg to sit down and talk about this. The bottom line of the conversation was quite simply, we don't have anybody else to turn to. We have Plan B and we have Plan C, but none of them are optimum. We know you're a person of integrity. You'll do what's right. You have a level of experience in government. And there's lots to that because I am involved in government there, not only as a township supervisor for 6 years, but we want you to run for governor. And they said, we can't guarantee you anything, or run for representative. We can't guarantee you anything, but this district, 70% Republican, we think if you have the support of the Republican leadership, you will win, both in a special election as well as a primary and in the fall election. And I will tell you, when you want to make a difference and you want to affect change and you think you have the answers, it's very tempting. And in both cases, both to Representative Baker as well as to Republican leadership, I said I need time to pray and think. And after about a week, my wife came to me and she said, Bob, something's bothering you. Would you tell me about it? And so I did. I did call my good friend Jim Clymer, and I said, listen, this is out here. And just want you to know what's going on. But beyond that, we spent a lot of time in prayer. I knew that I would stand by the principles of this party, no matter what party I belonged to. One of the requisites was I would join the Republican Party. And so the principles and issues didn't mean anything from that angle. I would stand by them. But joining the Republican Party would be the price. And I had to think about it because there were some trade-offs. And eventually, after 2 weeks, or maybe 3, I felt that in prayer, God answered and gave me very clear direction. And it was these 3 things. Number 1, I already told you I'm principal at Wesley Academy. And my calling is to work with young people. My duty is Christian education. And God reminded me of that. The second thing is, and my wife was quite troubled by it, she in fact in tears told me, I know what you're going to do, you're going to take it. And the second thing that I felt God very distinctly point out to me is remember my family. And we have made the decisions relative to our family based upon the family. God has never forsaken us. We have 7 wonderful children, all serving God today, 2 of which are ministers, all of which are doing their best to make an influence in the world around. But God said, you have to value your family, and this move does not put your family first. And then the third thing that God made very plain to me was, I'm not through with the Constitution Party. Keep going. Joe Meek said it last night. Persevere. It's been said before. We have a purpose and some things that we've got to set about to accomplish. So I turned the offer down, but I will tell you, in that time I had to introspectively reflect about my personal commitment to this party, our cause, and am I doing what I should be doing, how I should be doing it. Are we at the point in Pennsylvania with the Constitution Party where we should be? I had to look at where we're at and where we need to go. I'm moving on. I do have a story. I tell lots of stories. And in this story, just want to find some other wording here. I'm not from Alaska. We have others that are from Alaska. They may know more about it than me. The time period is the winter of 1924-1925. There's been record snowfall and record cold temperatures. In fact, the temperatures reached between -30 and -40 each night. Snow drifts greater than 40 feet high. The place is Nome, Alaska, specifically Nome, Alaska. It's located on the Bering Sea. I'll have a map in a second. It's located on the Bering Sea. It's the largest city in the Yukon Territory during the gold rush in 1900. Now there are 1,400 people living there, but they need something more important than gold. You see, there's been a diphtheria outbreak. It is known to be 100% fatal to Eskimo children and more than 80% fatal to adults. There is no serum for it in Nome. The telegraph message gets out. A Sergeant James Anderson from the U.S. Army Signal Corps signals help. President Coolidge and the King of England call for a National Day of Prayer on January the 25th, 1925. The key players as they developed are Dr. Curtis Welch, Leonard Seppala with his dog Togo, Charlie Olson, and Gunnar Kaysen with his dog Belto. And here's a picture of Front Street, the main street of Nome. I am using these with permission. Front Street, Main Street of Nome during that winter, 1924-1925. The town of Nome was built along the shore of the Bering Sea. In the winter, as shown here, the water freezes into mountains of craggy ice, making it impossible for ships to get through. Because of weather, they can't fly in or out of Nome. Airplanes have primitive navigation and basically fly line of sight. Also, winds are greater than 50 miles an hour during these near hurricane force during this time period. This is Nome's little hospital in 1925. Diphtheria patients were isolated in their own homes, but Dr. Welch used this hospital as a command post during the epidemic. In Washington, D.C., the territorial delegate, Alaska is not a state yet, the territorial delegate, Dan Sutherland, is in action. He's looking for serum. A large supply is in Seattle. There's over 1 million units of serum in Nebraska. It takes about 3,000 units per shot, which means they have enough for 3,000 shots, which with a town of 1,400, they would get enough. It's to be shipped to Seward, Alaska, but getting to Seward is not enough. This is a map of Alaska, and of course, Seward is down here. They're going to move up, and eventually across there is Nome. Musher Charlie Olson, who is the most experienced musher in the territory, suggests using sled dogs. His plan is to have mushers take 20-mile legs. These men would be running blind with less than 4 hours of daylight each day. They'd have to cross 2 mountain ranges in the darkness and in the weather. Leonard Seppala is regarded as the best musher of the world and once traveled from Niena to Nome in 9 days. Niena is up here. Nome is over here. 9 days. But this was in perfect weather. Governor Bone approves a plan. The plan is to take, from Anchorage in this area down here by train up to Niena, and then the mushers across. Governor Bone approves the plan. The mushers would be stationed at outposts along the route. They'd go in legs and hand off to the next musher. And think of the Pony Express and the Pony Express days from 1860. Charlie Olson, one of the mushers, and I'm going to quote him several times, he said, "You don't have to tell me it's impossible. I already know that. But people are praying, and when people pray, God does things." Tragically, the weather worsened. 2 storms crossed the Bering Sea, and once again there was a call to call it off. This is suicide. In fact, what these men would attempt to do is so brave and daring that today a large sled race is held each year in their honor. Today it's called the Iditarod. The serum goes by train. It arrived in Niena at 11 p.m. on the 27th of January. The first musher, Bill Shannon, will take the serum 52 miles along the route and handed off. This first leg of 52 miles took 13 hours, arrived at noon, and 28th of January. Excellent time. Here's a picture taken after the race that shows Leonard Seppler with Togo, one of his favorite dogs. Togo led the team on a grueling 91-mile stretch, 91-mile run. There are many dangers along the route. To begin with, there's cold, freezing to death. Also, humans and the dogs would have to breathe through the nose. If too much cold breath would enter through the mouth, the lungs could freeze. If the dogs would run too hard, they'd pant heavily and cold air would rush in and freeze their lungs too. If a dog started limping, it was a sign that the area between the dog's back legs, which wasn't covered with fur, was frostbitten. There was water from creeks and streams, and if you'd break through the ice, it posed a danger. If the feet got wet, it would almost freeze immediately. If that would happen, they'd have to stop, build a fire, dry everything out, get warm, and move on. The first half of the trip was along the Yukon River Valley. This was the easiest portion. And away from the river and the valley, the temperatures dropped even further. Fierce gales and huge snowdrifts were major obstacles. Now, the earlier legs would be longer, such as Bill Shannon's 52 miles. The last few legs would only be 10 to 15 miles apiece. The dogs were reported to have limped into each relief point where the serum would be transferred to the next musher. And the dogs, time after time, were suffering from frostbite. Togo, who's here, was small for a sled dog, but he's a born leader. Togo simply felt that Togo was the smartest dog in all of Alaska. Togo had a special talent. He could travel in a perfectly straight line, and he never went off course, which saved the team time and energy. Back to our map of Alaska, Seppler's 91-mile leg was the longest. His leg runs around Norton Bay down to sea level, and this is Norton Bay up here. And despite the weather, the mushers have made great time. Within 4.5 hours, the serum has moved to within 67.5 miles of Nome. Seppler hands off the serum to the man who suggested all of this, Charlie Olson. Olson's run is fairly short, but his leg includes starting a climb over one of the last mountain ranges, which is going to climb 5,000 feet. Believe it or not, a mountain range is going to go from sea level to 5,000 feet through there. Olson reaches the musher. He's a hand off the serum to Gunnar Kaysen. And this is what Olson said afterwards. You can't go on. It's over. Seppler just barely made it. He was all played out. His dogs were so tired they fell over right in their harness. I never saw anything like it. I had a rough time too. The gale blew my sled off the trail for 4 or 5 times, knocked it clean over. I took my gloves off to put blankets around the dogs. My hands got frozen. I will lose some fingers. Don't go on. What we tried was special. It was amazing, but it just can't be done. We tried, but it wasn't meant to be. It's over. Gunnar Kaysen responded, no, they're still praying. That slowed. Charlie Olson continued, listen, Balto's not a trained lead dog. You're the roughest mountain range to climb, and your dog is an untrained lead dog. He will get you killed. Don't even try it. Gunnar Kaysen took the serum, looked at the waiting team. He gave the command, hup, hup, or mush, mush. That's a word, lead out. Hup, Balto, hup. Olson later said that at that moment a gush of wind came up and the dogs instinctively curled, trying to protect themselves from the cold. Gunnar Olson cried out, don't listen to that wind, Balto. Hup, mush, march on, we must go. They were lost within 10 to 15 feet because of visibility. And you know that's part of our fault, or part of our problem. We're paralyzed by the storm that's around us. Gunnar Kaysen gave the command, hup, hup, and his dogs went into the mission, into the storm. Charlie Olson would later say that the bravest words he ever heard were hup, hup. And you know, because Balto started to pull, every other dog pulled. And the last words that Charlie Olson heard were hup, hup. Kaysen's goal was a town of port safety. They climbed the mountain range, and it looked like and it seemed like days to climb the mountain, but in reality, it only took minutes. The sled overturned twice, and once he had to reach for the serum in the darkness as it had fallen out of the sled. Kaysen suffered fractured ribs and broken bones in his right arm. But when he got to port safety, there were no lights on. They couldn't believe that the trip was going on. The next musher and the team weren't ready, and it'd take hours to get them ready. What do you do when you've done your job and the next person hasn't done his? Do you go on? Kaysen went on. Next town, there was total darkness, and Kaysen went through the town without even realizing he went through it. Gunnar Kaysen and his team, led by Belto, arrived in Nome at 5 a.m. on the 2nd of February. The serum had arrived in 5¼ days. Kaysen is so frozen, he's bent over at the waist, he can't stand up straight, and the only thing that is reported is that he said was, "Good dog, isn't it wonderful what prayer can do?" 350 miles by train, I lost something. 670 miles by sled, the epidemic is halted. There's a picture of a statue in New York Central Park. I'm sorry, but the mushers are heroes. Gunnar Kaysen goes to Washington, D.C., meets the president, but they insist the dogs are heroes. There's a statue of Balto in Central Park in New York City. He is the only animal to have a soul statue devoted to himself, and on it says, when his master called Hup, he went. And when he was asked about it later, Gunnar Kaysen said this, "You got to get it in here before you can get it out there." Olson was also asked about it, and this is what he said, and this is the point of the whole story. He said, "I had grandchildren in Nome, and I had the serum." The point is this: how many children you have? Grandchildren, great-grandchildren? Are we going to leave our nation in a better shape than what we received it? They're going to pay a terrible price if we aren't faithful to carrying the serum, so to speak. We've been entrusted with a Constitution that we must see is properly handed off to the next generation. Do you love America and our principles enough to do something about it? I've got just 2 parts with 8 total ideas. I'm finished. Will you pray? This is my commitment. 3 minutes a day. 3 minutes a day is, I think, sufficient. 1 is for our blessings. 1 is for our families, and 1 is for our leaders, both within the party as well as national and all the way down to local leaders. The second is we're going to have to work. That's my commitment. I am committed to our party and our ideals. We have to do it for the next generation. Thank you.